For many, it was long overdue, and today in Saskatchewan, survivors of the 60s Scoop received a formal apology from the province.
My pledge to you today is that we will honor and respect your experiences. We will learn from your experiences, and we will continue to engage with you.
Premier Scott Moe apologized for the Saskatchewan's role in separating Indigenous children from their families. Between the 1960s and 1980s, tens of thousands of children were removed from their homes and adopted across Canada and worldwide, primarily to white families. Moe went on to say how moved he was to hear stories from survivors of the 60s Scoop and admitted that the province failed them.
It's difficult for most of us to comprehend what the individuals of the 60s Scoop went through. I myself certainly cannot pretend to know. But I do know this. In our province, we are only as strong as our families. We are only as strong as our communities. Family and community. These are the bedrock institutions, the foundation of a strong Saskatchewan. We failed the survivors we heard from in the sharing circles, and so many others. We failed their families. And we failed their communities. We failed. On behalf of the government of Saskatchewan and on behalf of the people of Saskatchewan, I stand before you today to apologize. I stand before you today to say sorry. We are sorry for the pain and the sadness that you have experienced. We are sorry for your loss of culture and language. And to all of those who lost contact with their family, we are so sorry. There is nothing that we can offer that will fully restore what you have lost. What we can offer is the solemn assurance that government policies have changed, and they continue to change. While there are still too many First Nations and Métis children in care, today we work with 17 First Nations Child and Family Services agencies to deliver culturally appropriate child welfare services to our vulnerable children in over 60 First Nations communities. Whenever possible, we need to keep our families together.
The head of the Assembly of First Nations has responded to Moe's apology in a tweet. National Chief Perry Bellegarde says, this morning, Premier Scott Moe apologized on behalf of the Saskatchewan government for its role in the 60s Scoop. While this is a welcome first step toward reconciliation, First Nations look forward to seeing concrete action from the government of Saskatchewan that will help ensure First Nations children are protected and able to be successful in life. We can't let this happen again. My next guest is one of the people who was uprooted from their families. Raven Sinclair is a 60s Scoop survivor and has done extensive research on this topic at the University of Regina, and she joins me now live from Saskatoon. So, Raven, how do you feel after listening to that apology from the Premier?
I feel pretty good, yeah. I was somewhat indifferent to it, but I tuned in. And, I found his words to be very thoughtful and respectful and optimistic.
Why were you
so
indifferent?
When I heard,
Sorry.
Oh, well, I've done a lot of recovery work, and so I don't need an apology from anyone. It doesn't really make a difference to my experience. But I understand, my own experience of listening to it. I was surprised at my own emotional response to it. And, I know that to a lot of people it's very meaningful. So I didn't want my own sort of indifference to it to have an impact. I'm really glad that I did watch it because, again, I thought it was very respectful and I appreciated those words and the intention behind them.
What were the emotions you were feeling as you were listening that you didn't expect?
Well, in particular, when Premier Moe talked about the destruction of families and the losses that people experienced, it was just such a reminder. And so I experienced a real feeling of grief in that moment. And just remembering, and I appreciated his words saying that, he can't, for himself and for so many people, they can't understand it because they haven't gone through it. And to me, those were very true words. Yes.
And what was your personal experience? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, as I've said to many people over the years, there's a real continuum of experiences, and some really bad and some really good. And I would say that my foster care experience was pretty horrific, but my adoptive family was very loving and well-intentioned. There were some, glitches in there. But overall, I got sufficient love and nurturing in my experience. To help me to cope.
And can you tell me about what this? You've done a lot of research on this, so tell me a little bit more about what this was like for so many Indigenous people.
Well, I think that the biggest sort of impact that this has, is particularly on survivors, is just that it's out in the public realm, because the issue has been, in this sort of cone of silence for decades. And we've all known what our experience was and shared it with each other. But most people, even now, people have no idea what this Indigenous child welfare system, the 60s Scoop, was all about. And so it's, in some ways, it's nice to have that recognition, because, hopefully that's what that will translate into is some sorts of supports and services for people to recover. Because, even though I didn't have the worst experience, I know that there were some people, and those stories will come out, but they're really suffering and they really need support. And so, I hang on to those words, and I'm an optimist. So I hang on to those words of the Premier that will make a change. And I like the words of unity as well, because I'd like to see Saskatchewan, approach this issue sort of collectively.
And how has that reconnection with your roots been like? What's that journey been like for you? It's fairly recent, right?
Well, no, it's about 30 years, but it took about 30 years, close to 30 years, for me to reattach to my siblings. And so I'm one of the fortunate ones in that I do have connection with both my adoptive family and my siblings now. And I don't even have the words to express the significance of that for me. I think that we take it for granted if we've never had any disruption in our family system. And the only thing that you can really equate it to in terms of the loss of our families is the death of a loved one. And so to be able to reconnect is really profound. And as well as, learning my language, learning my culture, and integrating those into who I am is really important, as it is for many, many of us.
Some survivors argue, that an apology doesn't do enough. Do you think that that's fair criticism, that there needs to be more concrete action?
That's a difficult one, because I know that when wrongdoing occurs in our system, that's why we have the legal system, and then you go through court and you seek reparation, and that's what the national class action about cultural loss was about. And so it remains to be seen what people will do in that regard. I know that there are lawsuits being formulated. An apology, I think, is significant, though, just in terms of will. And the intention to the acknowledgement of what happened, and that we just didn't sort of make it up and imagine this whole system. Yes.
How would you summarize, for those who don't know much about this, what did happen?
Well, I think in the aftermath of residential schools, there was a lot of sort of social disarray, and as a result, and then we also had a brand new sort of child welfare or social work system growing, and was sort of an unholy alliance that happened, and a lot of Indigenous children came into care, some legitimately, and justifiably, and that's what the child welfare system is for. But as a researcher, I've come across a lot of stories of people who there was very little justification for why they were taken. And in my own situation, my mother had no idea what was going on, and she didn't have any recourse. She was just, she didn't sign any documents, and we were just removed and made crown wards without sort of any of her input. And luckily we don't do that anymore. I don't think. And so, we have some work to do to redress what's happened.
Raven, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raven Sinclair is a 60s Scoop survivor and a professor of social work at the University of Regina.